I remember when the first portable phones came out. It was in the 80s, and I used to think about that, and I thought, hey, that's kind of neat. I mean, you actually could have a telephone with you whenever you go somewhere that you could use. That sort of made all the sense in the world. And then as we got into the 90s, the cell phone became kind of a status symbol. And as if it wasn't bad enough that you would be in a restaurant or a movie and somebody would be talking on the phone to make sure that you knew that they were important because they had a cell phone, the cell phone morphed into the almighty smartphone. And that's been a trend that I've hated since day one. I remember growing up in a small town called Hickson, Tennessee, and about a mile from our house was a large field. And my dad used to take us there to fly kites. We did that up until about 1970, because in 1971, that field was replaced with a gigantic mall. And I never flew kites there again. Come to think of it, I never flew kites again. But I sure did spend a lot of time in that mall wasting time. More than I should have. You know, I didn't know it then, but I actually was participating in trends. In those days, it was the trend for kids to go outside and get fresh air and do physical things, like fly kites, ride bicycles to the mall, and for me, ride motorcycles. I thought that was unique, but actually it wasn't. It was just a trend that I was participating in. I just didn't know it at the same time. But looking back on it now, I can see that the part of that was growing up, but the motorcycle side of it was something that stayed with me. So there's something deeper about that trend. I mean, I don't go fly kites, and I rarely ride bicycles, and I don't yearn to do either. But I certainly do yearn to ride motorcycles, and it's something that makes me feel better whenever I do it. So as I got older, I began to wonder, what is it about trends that attract us? How are they created? Who starts them? But more importantly, why do they end? When it comes to motorcycles, there is no doubt that in the 60s and 70s, there was literally an explosion of growth, at least here in the United States and in the West in general. That was in large part due to advancements in engineering, making motorcycles smaller displacement, less expensive, and available to the masses. It was a stroke of genius on the part of the people who started that trend. Because up until that time, motorcycles, at least again here in the West, had a particular reputation, and it was one that followed them home from World War II. I mean, motorcycle riders were thought to be, you know, kind of rough, kind of tough, and Hollywood didn't shy away from that. So Hollywood added to that reputation of motorcyclists being kind of an outlaw, kind of a different kind of person, and not necessarily the kind of person that everybody would aspire to be. But that all changed in 1966. Honda came out with their "You See the Nicest People on Motorcycles" campaign, and it really stuck. I mean, it was a stroke of genius because they single-handedly created a trend. But it was a trend that was born of the people riding the motorcycles. I mean, no one forced the people riding the motorcycles like me and my brother to ride motorcycles. It was something we wanted to do. It was market-based. It was kind of an organic trend. You know, it was one where a manufacturer or several manufacturers put a lot of effort into designing these motorcycles without any idea as to whether or not the public would accept it and if it would be a thing they could capitalize on. You know, so it was truly market-based, and the results speak for themselves. But I also experienced in that time a different kind of trend, and it was about the time I was learning to drive. And I didn't know it at the time, but you know, as the oil embargoes took place and gas was becoming more expensive, lawmakers in Washington, D.C. enacted what were called the CAFE standards. And basically what they said was, okay, to American manufacturers or anybody that wants to sell a car in America, your cars have to get an average across your entire fleet of, I think it was like 18 miles a gallon. And they were going to ratchet that up every single year. The ironic bit about that is they instituted these standards pretty much right on the heels of the muscle car boom in America. Americans certainly wanted motorcycles and they certainly wanted powerful, fast cars, and manufacturers delivered that. So again, it was market driven. But these CAFE standards took place, and all of a sudden you began to see a watering down of the cars that you previously thought were pretty favorable. I remember cars in the 70s and 80s started getting pretty unremarkable. I mean, you know, and in order to further this, what manufacturers did was they made lines of cars that had inflated mile per gallon ratings so they could sell their low mileage cars that the American people wanted. And what resulted was a couple of decades in the 80s and 90s for the most part, where the cars that were produced were really generic. And I mean, they don't even hold up today. I mean, I remember my parents had a 1978 Oldsmobile Omega, and I don't think I've ever seen one of those come across an auction block. But at the same time, a 1978 Trans Am has a different effect. So those CAFE standards were instituted and they became trends that manufacturers had to follow, but they didn't necessarily translate into cars that people wanted. And so those were kind of what I call non-organic trends. And now here in the early part of the 21st century, we've seen the same thing happening with motorcycles. Motorcycles, for the most part, coming out of the early 2000s, were on a rampage. I mean, if you look at the big V-twin cruiser market, that was growing quickly. The speed wars among the big four Japanese manufacturers was going. A lot of European bikes were getting back on, and the motorcycle growth was going really good. And, you know, I think there were societal trends that happened that, you know, and I've talked about this before, where times come and go, trends come and go. So, you know, I know kids today, they have a lot of things on their plate besides motorcycles, bicycles, and kites. And I get that. That's totally understandable. But I also think that these trends that are being set by regulators and bureaucrats and just governments around the world in general are having a negative effect. And it is driving motorcycles to a point that I think it's becoming unpalatable to younger people. So where is all this leading? Well, you know, and I just want to mention that in reading the comments from the first part of this series, my last video, I noticed an uptick in comments from the younger generations, both millennial and Gen Z. And definitely I'm not focusing any fire of any kind on that generation. In fact, my two stepdaughters, one's a millennial, one's a Gen Z. So definitely I'm just sounding off on some of the things that I've noticed over, 50 or so years. And when it comes to trends, I've seen trends that are good and positive, as I've said, and certain ones that are bad, it's not lost on me that I used a cell phone to start both of these videos, but I find that cell phones have kind of supplanted so much of life for young people that I wonder, where is the future going? I mean, there's that movie, I forget what it's, Wall-E or something like that. It's about a robot that is cleaning up the planet because all the humans had to leave. And when he goes up to the spaceship and finds all the humans, they're all sitting in chairs being flown around. They don't have any kind of physical aptitude whatsoever. They're all sitting at a screen and drinking from a big gulp. And while that's funny, it's becoming true. And, I have a love-hate relationship with the cell phone or the smartphone, but it certainly, you know, like I said, I think that, you know, for a lot of people, it's becoming a portal to experience. And I think what I mean by that is, you know, as I mentioned in one of my videos, you know, when I grew up, there was no way to experience anything other than to go and physically do it. Whereas, you know, now if you want to see what it's like to skydive, you can watch 100 million videos here on YouTube about it. You can see the consequences of it, and you can make a decision based on what you see, and that is information. You know, again, I use the analogy, it's like drinking from a fire hose. And sometimes that is not good. In fact, if you think of it, you cannot drink from a fire hose and quench your thirst. You can blow the back of your head off or whatever else, but you really can't take a drink from a fire hose. And so that's what, you know, is going on is, you know, through social media and cell phones, you know, we've kind of lost touch with ourselves, and we're experiencing life through, and this is all my opinion. Again, like I said, I'm just an old guy from Tennessee, but I think so many people are missing out on experiences that will enrich them and last for a lifetime. And, you know, I think trends are largely responsible for it. You know, trends that we had, you know, in the 60s and 70s, and then, you know, of course, trends that happened in the 30s and 40s, long before me. You know, they're gone now, and they're never coming back. And so the only way that hopefully the younger generations could experience anything like that is through, you know, maybe finding a video like this and saying, I wonder what that's like, and giving it a shot. You know, trends, I look at them with a, you know, kind of a raised eyebrow. I always wonder first, is there any, you know, what it's trying to get me to do versus, you know, what really happens. I heard a really smart guy once say, when you get something for free, you're what's being sold. And that holds true with, you know, like when you get you know, your smartphone and you download an app because, you know, you want to find out what your heart rate is and all this other stuff. Well, you're the product that's being sold because you're filling up a database with information about you. And, you know, I've said it to anyone that would listen, that when the smartphones came along, you know, it's like that is a portal into you. And I think in some ways that that's not a good thing. But yeah, motorcycling has stood the test of time, and I just wanted to make this video about trends. And in the next video, I'm going to try to tackle probably what I think is the elephant in the room when it comes to access for younger people to motorcycling, and that is economics. That is one of the biggest hurdles that I see for young people to enjoy this hobby as much as we did, and I'll get into that in the next video. But until then, I want to say thank you for watching. Thanks for subscribing. If you have any comments, as always, put them in the comment section below, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks. Bye.